I am here with Haviv Rettig. Haviv, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Sam. It's good to be here.
We were just talking offline that you were we could be interrupted because you were in the middle of a war. This is it's got to be intense over there. I mean, so you and I we scheduled this podcast some weeks before Israel struck Iran, and we had too much to talk about even then. But now we have the current front in the war to talk about. So let's just jump in. I mean, many people will be aware of your work because you have been, to my ear, the most eloquent spokesman for and journalist covering what is happening in Israel, and both factually and just the moral logic of the war in Gaza. Um, but how do you summarize your work as a journalist at this point?
First of all, it's a thank you. It's an honor. I have had two hats. I've been a professional working journalist since 2005, but I had the side hustle as a history teacher, whether it's in English for American college students visiting Israel. I've spoken to, we once estimated something like 8,000 of them over the last 15 years, and Israeli pre-military academies and other informal frameworks. And when the war happened, something very strange happened, which was that I have these lectures online. I have these lectures that some colleges put on YouTube, and they went insanely viral. And
Mm,
suddenly, everybody really, there was this hunger for the deep explanations. Nobody here is stupid. Nobody here is a moral cartoon, even if some Westerners insist on making us so, whether Israelis or Palestinians. And if you can give that story that Israelis and Palestinians and different kinds of Israelis and Palestinians actually think they're living in, people find that extremely, extremely valuable. So I think that's what I'm trying to provide. It's more teacher than journalist,
mm.
actually, or maybe it's what journalism should be at its best. I don't know. It's certainly what I think is my goal.
Yeah. And can you remind me why is your English so perfect and unaccented? What's going on there? Have you are you an AI that has perfected the the simulation of human speech?
I keep trying to convince people it's Mossad training, but
Yeah.
nobody believes it.
Uh,
No, half my childhood was in the States
okay.
because of my parents' work. I went
Which
to high
half?
school in Wisconsin.
What years were you in the States?
Eh, Something like ages 9 to 18, something
Okay.
like that.
Okay. Great. Well,
Yeah.
let's start with Iran. I mean, ultimately I want to talk about the war in Gaza and the pervasive misunderstandings about it, and really just the pervasive misunderstanding about Israel's role in the world, place in the moral order of civilization at this moment. I mean, I have not been shy about linking the fate of Israel to the fate of Western civilization in its contest with Islamist theocracy. Um, so I do view Israel. I mean, obviously, Israel is fighting its own war, but I think it's also fighting a much larger war for the West. It's even beyond the West. I mean, really a war for open societies and liberal democracies. But we'll get back to that. I mean, those topics are unfortunately evergreen or virtually evergreen. But let's start with the up to the moment uncertainty about what is happening with Iran and what sort of assistance Israel is likely to get or not likely to get from the U.S. at this point. What is the state of the operation in Iran as you currently understand it? And I should say we're recording on Tuesday morning Pacific time and the 17th of June. And yeah, Haviv, give me your sense of what's the current state of the Israeli operation in Iran, and what is Israel expecting the next steps to be, both its own and coming from the U.S.
We have had, there are two ways to answer that. There's the immediate, the 5 days of war that we've already seen, and then there's the 20 months of war against the various proxies that Iran built out essentially for this war, and they're no longer available to it. So I'll just zoom in on those 5 days, and then we can expand, out into 30,000 feet if that's useful. But
Yep.
the war began 5 days ago on Thursday night, so I guess Friday morning. And it was It was a culmination of decades of unbelievable competence and planning and the building of entire, there are factories on Iranian soil run by Mossad operatives, building drones that then took off at the moment at each hour as the Israeli planes were overflying Iraqi airspace, and took out a lot of launchers and a lot of Iran's ballistic missile capabilities. Iran's great threat to Israel in this kind of immediate kinetic war is its missile fleet. It has thousands and thousands, or arsenal, I should say. It has thousands of missiles, and they target our cities, and they've caused some damage in our cities already. But the great bottleneck for Iran, the Israelis understood very early on, and that has been sort of the foundational strategy for Israeli defense, is not even the missile shield, which has actually performed fairly well against incredibly big, incredibly heavy, fast moving, long distance ballistic missiles, but it's the launchers. They have a
Mm,
bottleneck of launchers. They have thousands of missiles, but they don't have thousands of launchers. And so, if you can keep destroying launchers, if you can keep forcing them to deploy new launchers out of their hiding places and find them, the Israelis very early, immediately, almost immediately, took out Iranian air defenses, what was left of them after the November operation last November, and gained air superiority over Iranian airspace, and have been just flying around Iranian airspace, tracking down those launchers while taking out many, many of the strategic assets of the Iranian revolutionary regime. That includes the chief of staff of the IRGC, and then 4 days later, his replacement, the new chief of staff of the
mm,
IRGC. It includes almost the entire leadership of the IRGC Air Force. It includes so many of the military advisors and people around the supreme leader. It includes the people in charge of the response, of the missile command, of all the things that Iran needs to actually manage a serious counter to the Israeli war, to the Israeli attack. And it's astonishing. It's astonishing.
yeah.
There are technological achievements here that America needs to learn from. For example, Israeli planes carrying missiles. Missiles borne by planes don't usually go ballistic. In other words, they shoot point to point. You point it at something and they shoot at it, and they can sometimes track and sometimes not. But Israeli missiles, in order to increase the range of F-15s, which don't have the range to take off from Israel and fly all the way to Iran. So Israel has created missiles for these planes that, when they launch, they go up higher into the sky, and then they glide down. They use a ballistic trajectory
Mm,
to massively increase their speed and still manage to very precisely target. Israel has put missiles on the wings of F-35s, which are not designed to carry missiles on those wings. So it's an air force of such astonishing competence and innovation that it's stuff Americans can't do with their own equipment.
mm,
Is what we've seen in this operation, and the sheer brazenness of such a massive Mossad presence. I think one just last point. One of the really fascinating things to come out of it is what explains the Israeli penetration of Iranian leadership to the point where Israeli intelligence actually engineered a meeting of the top command of the general staff of the IRGC Air Force in order to bomb that meeting. So they made sure that everybody's schedules were cleared and they could all come to this meeting, and they were all invited by the right people to this meeting. And this meeting took place in a place where the Israelis actually engineered the meeting to take
wow.
place.
Wow.
And the answer seems to be that lots of Iranians, I know this is a shocking thought, don't like the regime. And lots of pieces of the regime are set against the rest of the regime. And lots of minorities in Iran, it's a country that's only about 60% Persian, really hate Persian rule over them. And so you have all of these. It's kind of an old multi-ethnic empire in that
Mm,
sense, of the old model of the Ottomans or the Austro-Hungarians. And the Mossad knows how to make profoundly good use of that. And so Israel's full capabilities of a competent state are on display, and the shocking incapability, the incompetence of the Iranian regime that has managed to frighten the world from the Obama administration to the Arab world for decades
mm.
turns out to be the paradigmatic paper tiger.
How do you explain how deterred the U.S. in particular has been by Iran all these years? I mean, I view Israel at this moment doing what America should have done many, many years ago, and perhaps could never accomplish with this um, skill. I mean, it's, in some sense, I worry about the degradation of our own competence. by comparison. But it's also there's been a degradation of our almost our moral competence. I mean, Israel is doing something. I mean, I understand that this is an existential threat to Israel, a nuclear armed Iran, in the way that it isn't for America. But how do you, I mean, to my eye, America has been deterred in the face of Iranian belligerence for decades. It's almost as though we have treated them like they've already had nukes. How do you explain our unwillingness even now, even now that you have cleared the skies over Iran? Uh, I mean, and it would seem we could simply drop our bunker busting bombs to end this story on really, I think just two sites would require it. Um, how do you understand America's um, relatively prostrate position with respect to really an endless number of explicit challenges and even combat maneuvers on Iran's part. I mean, Iran was killing U.S. troops in our various misadventures in the Middle East, right? And to my knowledge, we didn't really respond to that. I mean, apart from our killing Soleimani back in the first Trump administration, um, how do you understand America's posture here?
Even that killing of Soleimani caused a tremendous amount of pearl clutching among the good and great and wise. I have to say, it's such a fascinating question. I suspect you'll be able to answer it better than me. So
Mm,
let me give something much less than an answer, which is the Israeli experience of this American motionlessness, this culture of motionlessness, um, innovation, and a willingness to be brazen and bold, maybe because everything is at stake, is kind of the defining feature of the Israeli organizational culture of the Israeli security services. So, for example, the pager operation.
mm,
The entire debate around the world was immediately a moral one. Is it okay to take out the 1,500 top people of a terror organization or just an antagonist combatant in a war with almost no civilian costs? Or is, in fact, the fact that a single civilian can be found to have died mean that the Israelis are just evil monsters still? Was the stupid, genuinely just ridiculous debate that immediately was sparked by the pager operation. But consider the debate that should have been there was and it was in some places, but not sufficiently in the major media, was the astonishing brazenness of just the boldness of it. There was a according to reports from journalists who are in the know on these things, there was a young woman, 30-year-old woman in the Mossad, who had this idea, and she came to the leadership with the idea, and she said, "What if we could do this crazy thing?" And the Mossad is a big bureaucracy.
mm,
But nevertheless, in the Mossad, from the top levels down, they said, let's put it together. And so they pieced together the entire supply chain of a fake pager company that then had to go build specially designed pagers to put explosives in them in ways that would only detonate at the right moment. They had to actually develop one of the most difficult parts of that operation was to have the radio signal from within Lebanon in very different parts of the country that are not within radio reach of each other
mm,
go off at the same time. It was this enormous operation through from a Taiwanese supply chain all the way through radios broadcasting on the ground. And then you ask yourself, what would it take for the CIA to okay that kind of operation? To find a group within the CIA willing to put it together and then launch it. How many things could go wrong, and who would take the risks to
mm,
have something like that go wrong? The Israelis, after the 2006 war in Lebanon and Gaza, where tens of thousands of missiles fell on Israel, rockets fell on Israel, and there weren't enough bomb shelters, and there was no missile defense of any kind, of any meaningful kind, for short range rockets and missiles. The Israelis decided to fix that, and they began to develop this idea of the Iron Dome, which is kind of technically equivalent to shooting a bullet out of the sky with another bullet
mm,
that you fire out of a gun.
yeah.
And the Iron Dome concept went to the Pentagon, and the Pentagon actually told the Obama administration that it's unfeasible. Physics doesn't allow for this to be done. And there were advocates for this, whether it's APAC or in Congress. There were advocates in Washington that said, no, if we can do this. In other words, we trust the Israelis to be able to pull off this technological wonder. And enough people had enough of a leap of faith to actually, including President Obama, to actually put the kind of money behind it. And one of the things that Obama bought with that money was also co-ownership of the system and of the technology by the United States. In many, many ways, Iron Dome is representative both of the motionlessness of America and of this massively innovative kind of culture in Israel, because the Pentagon has a very hard time having, putting out R&D tenders and just having new things developed, crazy, wild ideas examined for their strategic advantage in war. And so the Pentagon almost has begun to treat Israel as a kind of easy R&D lab that sidesteps all of the bureaucracy
Mm.
of the American industrial, sort of military industrial world. You have very, very few in military companies that are producing serious military systems. There's not a lot of competition, and there's not a lot of courage in the bureaucracy to pursue crazy ideas. And the same is true in policy. You go to the State Department, and people are saying the same, just inane, empty pablum that they've been saying for 30 years. And that's how you get ahead. And nobody is willing to say something different, something a little strange, a little crazy, something that risks sounding neocon one week or a little isolationist another week. There just isn't a real serious. Whenever we encounter, I don't come from the State Department. I'm talking about people I meet as a journalist from the outside, but
Mm.
there isn't a culture of real debate, real discussion. I think that the monocultures you see in American elite academia is a similar monoculture that you see in American government. And so the Israelis are just out there to win. And anybody who has a new idea, a good idea, and by the way, the Israelis also have groupthink and catastrophic misunderstandings of the enemy. That's the story of October 7th. But there's also the capacity to do the opposite. There's the capacity to really go after new ideas, crazy ideas, and try to pull them off.
So this operation was obviously years in the making. Why did Israel finally decide to act now?
I believe the official reason.
Mm.
It's not the only reason, but it is also a reason. Iran is nearing weaponization. Iran is nearing the capacity to take the enriched uranium, which during the Biden years, because there was zero fear that Biden would ever possibly pull a trigger on any kind of military response, Iran just moved ahead to 60% enrichment, which is very, very close to weapons grade enrichment. And the weaponization program, the technology of producing a bomb and actually putting it on a missile, was very, very advanced.
Mm.
The scientists Israel targeted in this operation were not actually part of the enrichment system, they were part of the weaponization system.
Hmm.
And Iran was going to have nukes. And the other reason was the missiles. You don't need necessarily a nuclear device detonating over Tel Aviv, 400 meters over Tel Aviv, if you can drop 10,000 1.5 ton missiles with conventional warheads on Tel Aviv. It would have the same damage to physical buildings. It would
Hmm.
have tremendous damage to people. Not the same, but nevertheless tremendous. Iran was on a path to produce massive numbers of missiles very, very quickly. And to actually be able to get past the kinds of bottlenecks that are allowing us to fight this war with minimal damage. So there was the simple timeline of Iranian capabilities, and obviously, unavoidably, there was the timing of the political window of the Trump administration.
Hmm.
It turned out that Netanyahu and Trump saw eye to eye on the question of the Iranian nuclear program. Trump did ask, allegedly, according to Israeli officials reporting what they heard from the Trump Netanyahu meetings back in the spring, back in March. Trump told Netanyahu, just give me a home run, right? He doesn't want to have grinding wars in the Middle East that drag America in. But if there's a home run, he'll back it.
Right.
That's what the Israelis were told back in the day. And I think that Trump now believes, and the reason he's willing to face down, the Tucker Carlsons on this question is that he believes the Israelis came through spectacularly
Mm.
in that regard. So that political window, I think, also was a big part of it.
Well, to continue with your baseball analogy, they've Israel has certainly hit a triple, but as far as actually ending the Iranian nuclear program, it sounds like there's one more step, at least, that has to be accomplished. What is the expectation of on your side with regard to the U.S. coming in with B-2 bombers and actually destroying the capacity at Fordow, and I don't know if Natanz is still extant, but it sounds like that there really is not there's nothing there's no armaments on your side that you own or that you can wield on your all on your own that can accomplish the complete destruction of the most hardened centrifuges.
That is what everybody knows.
Mm,
And technically, on paper, that is absolutely the case. And there was absolutely no way for Israel to sidestep the Radwan force of Hezbollah and just dismantle Hezbollah as a strategic mobilizable force without fighting the most hardened fighters, who would exact thousands of or hundreds of casualties at least from the Israeli military. And then they did. Does the Mossad have something up its sleeve? We know that this whole strategy of taking over supply chains
mhm,
has already been done vis-a-vis the Iranian nuclear program. At one point, I remember reading years ago there was a Mossad operation that it infiltrated the supply chain of furniture to one of these installations and managed to get a desk booby-trapped with a bomb into one of the nuclear sites, and that
mhm.
desk exploded with tremendous force and
Well,
destroyed some significant portion. Does the Mossad have some trick up its sleeve for Fordo? If I'll put it this way, everybody has known for 15 years that, I mean, since they've known about Fordo, they've known that step two is Fordo.
mhm,
And so it is entirely possible that that the Israelis have a solution to Fordo. I have no idea what it would be, but we had no idea we had the current capabilities that we have. They've been, again, unprecedented in the history of warfare. A lot of people were talking about how the new war of drones and missiles would make air forces obsolete. The Israelis figured out how the integration of the two is vastly more powerful than either one alone.
mm,
So we're breaking new ground in the history of war, and there's reason to believe the Israelis can handle Fordo. If the Americans do it, the Americans take on costs, right? The Iranians will have to launch missiles just for the show of it. After threatening for so many decades, they will have to launch missiles at American troop deployments in the region. Ironically, that might actually bring the Americans in. In other words, even the fear that that could happen, or the theory that that's if something blows up in Fordo and it's Israeli, but the Iranians assume in the first 45 seconds that it's America because they don't
mhm,
think the Israelis can, then they attack American troops in UAE or Qatar. Um, that would bring the American response. And so, it's a delicate question. I completely understand Americans who say I don't want to get in on this, and I fundamentally, as a almost as a question of identity, believe that Israel has to be able to go it alone. But to take Fordo with Israeli capabilities might involve, assuming we don't have some magical rabbit that the Mossad has already managed to pull out a dozen times in the last 20 months, might involve ground troops and might
mhm.
involve real difficult battle with real casualties for the Israelis, something that good planning has so far avoided. So I don't know to say more than that, but that is the big question everyone is now waiting to hear. I should also say, and this is really a rumor, but these rumors have all turned out to be correct. There's an old joke about Israeli secrets. A KGB spy comes to Tel Aviv to meet with an Israeli connection in the Israeli security services. And he arrives at the apartment and he rings the doorbell. And the guy answers the door and he says, "Can I help you?" And the guy says, "The birds fly south in winter." And the guy says, "Excuse me?" And the KGB spy says, "The birds fly south in winter." And the guy says, "Oh, no, I'm Goldberg the dentist. You want Goldberg the spy. He's
Right.
on the second floor," right? It's this
Yeah,
idea that everybody knows everything.
yeah,
Ultimately, right, we journalists are required to only report on the Israeli nuclear program from foreign sources that reveal things, but it's not like people don't know, right? And so I have to say that there is now talk in Israel. Make of it what you will, that the next 2 days are a significant pivot from what has been up to now. That what has
mhm,
been up to now will continue. The hunt for the launchers will continue. Maintaining the launcher bottleneck that has meant 50 missiles in a round instead of 400 will continue. The pursuit of the regime will continue and expand probably to the energy sector, which it's already started doing. But there might be a serious pivot in the coming days. There have been talk about that and a lot of speculation about that in Israel.
and troops on the ground, how would that be accomplished? Is that through Syria? Is that, what is the access?
Luckily, I don't know anything, so I
Mm,
can talk freely.
mm,
Israel maintains capabilities that have not made sense in war since the 1950s. They've not been used since the 1950s. For example, active paratroopers trained to jump out of airplanes.
Hmm.
The last time an Israeli soldier jumped out of an airplane in a war, in combat situation, is 1956 in the Sinai. Um, and it was not a very useful operation then. And yet we have entire units and brigade level, units, thousands of men, able and equipped and trained to jump out of airplanes. It is not inconceivable, and this is stuff that's out there on the military blogosphere and things like that. It is not inconceivable that the Israelis have the capabilities to drop significant numbers of troops where they need to in Iran, who can take a region, um, prepare a landing field there, hold it, and conduct massive military operations while defending the place
Mm,
in ways that allow them to get into installations like Fordo, things like that. It's utter speculation, the kind of speculation that's been out there in public for decades, but Israel has those capabilities. And so, one of the ways that Israel really shines as a military is in the understanding that war is the realm of the unknown. That's something you learn in your first week in officer school in the IDF. You come to the battlefield with all the best laid plans, and then the enemy surprises you. And that is the nature and definition of the enemy in war. And then you have to improvise. But the most of what you're going to be doing on the battlefield is improvise.
mm,
By the way, in that sense, what's happened so far has been astonishing. For the enemy to have so easily fallen into all of our plans has been just a miracle
yeah.
and a gift. But the ability to do the ability to have wild and crazy kinds of options, redundancies, far more forces than you actually need on paper, is really important once you actually encounter that unknown, that battlefield
Mm,
situation. And so we have that, and I can imagine 6 different ways it could go down just from my being a junior, sergeant in the Israeli infantry 25 years ago. But it is, I think, doable. Very, very dangerous. We're going to lose people in an operation like that.
mm,
America could do it cleanly without any losses to our side, but America might not want to, and that's okay. Israel can handle things on its own. Israel needs to be able to handle things on its own.
yeah. I mean, I must say, speaking as an American, it wouldn't seem okay to me. I mean, I just view us as rudderless this isn't just a criticism of the Trump administration. Arguably, I think as you pointed out, Trump, all things considered, has been better has for Israel's predicament than we had any reason to expect a Kamala Harris administration would have been, at least with respect to the degree which she would have been captured by the far left moral confusion that you alluded to early on. Um, but it's just that the clarity of this morally and geopolitically, I think is impossible to exaggerate. I mean, we have a regime in Iran that was sprinting to acquire nuclear capability, uh, and for decades, it has advertised its aspiration to use this technology to perpetrate a genocide in the Middle East, right? I mean, it has been explicit in its. I mean, forget about its chanting death to America at every opportunity. It has been explicit in its aspiration to perpetrate a second Holocaust with the most powerful weapons it can get its hands on, and it's the mad work it's accomplished in supporting all of its proxies and its culpability for October 7th and the depredations of Hezbollah and I mean, the Houthis. I mean, it's just the idea that we were going to enter another round of fake negotiation and capitulation to this regime seems just morally insane to me. And in addition to all of that, I don't imagine this would be part of the calculus, but politically, but morally, in addition to all of that, I think we have reason to believe that the Iranian people, unlike many of the other Arab countries where we have meddled over the years, and only to find that they were many people, a majority of the population was still hankering for theocracy, even though we were spending blood and treasure to give them democracy. Iran seems like it is properly sick of theocracy. I don't know if that's 60% of the population or 80% of the population, but what you have in Iran, again, you know better than I, but it seems like you have in Iran a population that is just under the cover of hijab imposed silence. You have uh, certainly a population of women itching to live cosmopolitan, reasonably secular lives, and presumably there are many men in their lives who share the same frustration with the last 40 years of life in Iran. So it would, unlike some of these other countries where we thought we would be greeted with flowers and we were greeted with at minimum some more ambiguity than that. Um, in Iran, it seems a reasonable bet that most Iranians would be happy to be done with theocracy. Is that your impression of what's happening there?
Yeah, I mean, it runs deep. What America encountered in the Middle East was societies whose basic identity structures are very tribal. And I'm not criticizing, by the way. I think that's something that Israelis share with much of the
Hmm.
rest of the Middle East, in ways that make them a little bit strangers in the West, where being Sunni or being Shia in Iraq was not a theological difference between Sunni and Shia. I don't know what mystical traditions. It was a tribe. It was literally clans and groups and places that you live, who fight together and will defend you and will protect you in a world that is still a Wild West. And America didn't understand why they weren't all rushing to the banner of the great ideas of the Western Enlightenment.
Hmm.
And I don't know how to put this. I'm a big fan of the big ideas of the Western Enlightenment, and I thank God every day I have a tribe. There's some complex mixing of the two that produces a healthiest, happiest society. For example, frankly, forgive me for the flag waving here, but Israelis have all of the freedoms, the gay pride parades, and the self expressions and the religious diversities of the liberal West, and they also have the solidarity and the high birth rates, including among secular, high-tech engineers in
Hmm.
Israel have higher birth rates than the entirety of the rest of the developed world, and every other kind of Israeli has higher birth rates than them. And so we have that mix, and America encountered this thing that I think American culture didn't really know how to comprehend, how to deal with. It wrote a beautiful constitution for Iraq without contending with this deep complexity of a whole
Hmm.
nother way of understanding human belonging in society. In Iran, you have a completely different story. You very much have ethnic tribes and religious tribalism and all of that, but you have a regime with a story that is essentially fundamentally a deep betrayal of the very revolution that brought it to power. The Iran's revolution has two parts, and I say this not to tell people the history, but to invite people to fact check me so that they begin this journey into the history, because this really matters to understanding what's going to happen going forward. The Iranian Revolution, the Shah of 1978, before the revolution, was pro-American in the Cold War, but very much a tyrant with a secret police and
Yeah.
abusive and oppressive. And the revolution that sparked in 1978 in December was a revolution that allied all the different elements of Iranian society, all of them, from the clerical religious movements and mosques and charities of that Islamist world of Khomeini to the liberals, the liberal nationalists, the feminists, the communists, various communist groups that all fought against each other, obviously, the students, the wealthy, the poor, the bazaar merchants, the small shopkeepers, all these different elements of Iranian society came out to march in this revolution against the Shah. And what was amazing, it was literally millions of people marching over 2 days all over Iran. Something
Hmm.
like 15% of the population of the country all turned out. In Tehran itself, it was something like 2.5 million people, half the city
Hmm.
marched. And within 6 weeks, the Shah was gone. And 2 weeks after he was gone, Khomeini came back from exile. And what would then happen over the course of 1979, and then over the course of the next 9 years, was the slow removal from that coalition, almost always violently,
Yeah.
of all those other elements of Iranian society as the religious factions consolidated power in this new government. So the promise of democracy, as all those marchers marched, you had banners. People should look up these marches from the Ashura rebellion. That's the holiday it happened on, of 1978. There were people marching with banners about democracy and liberalism and
Mhm.
and elections and rights of women. And the religious clerics were the most organized of all these oppositions, of all these social subgroups, because they had networks that the Shah had a hard time suppressing. You could easily suppress student groups on campus. You had a very hard time suppressing what a cleric would say, an imam would say in a mosque on a Friday, at a Friday prayer.
Mm.
And so they were the best organized and the best ready to take advantage. And they turned into an incredibly brutal theocracy. They pushed the Marxists to the point where many were killed, many fled to Iraq, to the Shia Arabs of Iraq, and in the Iran-Iraq War actually joined Hamas. Hamas, there's a Freudian slip of an
Mhm.
Israeli nowadays, joined Saddam's war on Iran, and so we're seen as traitors by Iran. And in 1988, the regime actually went through the prisons of Iran and murdered all the people they thought, over 5,000 people, belonged to these Marxist groups over the border in that war. And
Mm.
so, just a series of crackdowns and murders, the shuttering of universities, the firing en masse of all secular university lecturers. This regime came to power in one of the most beautiful moments in the history of this nation, of this competent and diverse and fascinating nation. And the first thing it did, and everything it did from that day one, was the rejection and dismantling of all of the promise of a potential, multi-party, multi-vision kind of parliamentarism that Iran could have been. And since then, 46 years, there have been only two supreme leaders, Khomeini and Ali Khamenei, who
Mhm.
is still the supreme leader now, as long as he's still alive. And that regime has basically managed to drive Iran into the dirt over those 46 years. The only success it has had in 46 years, the only accomplishment Iranian society can point to, is the regime sufficiently oppressing, sufficiently co opting different elites to stay in power. So every poll we have, the polls published in state media of the regime, tell the same fundamental story as polls coming in from outside. Um, the vast majority of Iranians, probably 90%,
Mm.
want the regime gone. They express it as disaffection with the economic problems. In this moment, when the war began, Iran was facing mass trucker strikes, mass nurse strikes, mass strikes of bakeries, all kinds of pieces of the economy. It just went through a terrible winter without access to gas. It's one of the most gas-rich countries in the world.
Mm.
One of the phrases that Iranians often talk about, especially in the Iranian diaspora, is the tragedy of a very poor nation living in a very rich country. And that's the
Mm.
story of this regime. So they hate it profoundly. And none of the tribalism matters because the whole point that brought them to power was this unity that they then cracked down on and turned into this running 2 generation long catastrophe.
Mm. So is it your understanding that Israel in its strikes so far has stopped short of trying to engineer a fall of the regime? I mean, have they not been attacking the theocratic ruling targets?
It's such a complex question, and such an important one. I believe that the Israelis would love for the regime to fall, solve all the problems in one fell swoop. There are plenty of governments out there that don't like us, but also aren't massive, immediate, catastrophic dangers to us because they're not this particular kind of regime. So,
Mm.
if Iran was run like Turkey, it would not seek nukes because it would be too busy building a serious economy. Now, Turkey might be headed in a more Islamist direction. Turkey is certainly headed in a more Islamist direction, but it's coming from a place of real democratic, open tradition. There's still elections, there's still local elections. Erdogan occasionally arrests his leading opposition leader,
Mm.
but there's enough democracy there that there's still a kind of competence and a need to actually take care of what the people actually need and not literally rob them blind at a mass scale over generations to build a nuke that nobody understands why you need. So, if Iran were a regime of the style of Turkey, I don't need it to be Switzerland, it would already not be a danger to Israel in any way. And so regime change is a shortcut. It's a wonderful
Mm.
idea. Let's do it. Let's great. I'm for it. The problem is nobody quite knows how. And America is very scared of regime change because it's failed repeatedly. Israel is not even able to imagine itself in a league where this is any kind of option, right? We have the population of Austria. We are not going to now go into this country 9 times our population and many more times our size
Mm.
geographically and somehow re engineer Iranian political society and consciousness into a new regime. So, what
But
I think
we
is
don't
happening,
think that
yeah,
the thirst for a new uh, government coming from the Iranian people themselves would accomplish effectively a coup in the aftermath of some decapitation strike from Israel?
they've spent 46 years doing nothing but figuring out how to prevent that from happening.
Mm.
And they have degraded the organizing capacity of every single power base in Iranian society to the point where it may not be doable.
Mm.
But the hope is that we meet in the middle. The hope is that we degrade that political elite and ruling elite and the IRGC and also the elements of the regime that are not turned against us, that are turned against their own people, like this thing called the Basij, which is this immense. It's a bunch of thugs who go to the streets to beat up protesters en
Yeah.
masse, but it's enormous and it has intelligence services. It's a kind of its own police as well. Um, can we degrade these institutions sufficiently to seriously open a window for courage to come forth and actually organize and take down the regime? The simple answer is I don't know. We're going to degrade them as far as we have to be able to take out the things that threaten us, the missile production facilities and the nuclear program. And the people will have to make a choice. Now, they've been under this thing for 46 years. Nobody doubts what the people want. There's simply no, there's a debate over whether it's 75% or 91%. There's no
Mhm.
debate about what the people want. And but the people will have to seize it on their own. We're not America, and we're a small people with tremendous strengths, and thankfully Iran is tremendously incompetent as a state. But that's the best I can do. Gosh, I hope so.